Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old 4th Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
All right, happy hump day and welcome to The Ron Show. Thank you for listening, whether it's on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com, or via podcast. It was 5 days ago we got this headline. Let's go to Jonathan Martin at the desk at 11 Alive News.
Right now, Georgia is one of several states joining a federal lawsuit against the Biden administration's SAVE plan. The lawsuit argues the plan is unconstitutional and will cost taxpayers $475 billion. Last year, the Supreme Court blocked the previous plan to cancel $430 billion of student loan debt. Now, the SAVE plan lowers monthly payments and offers a shorter pathway to loan forgiveness for low-income borrowers.
And then yesterday, State Attorney General Chris Carr joined the Politically Georgia podcast on WABE and via podcast, where the hosts discussed the state deciding to wade into that multi-state lawsuit. Atlanta Journal-Constitution reporter Greg Bluestein asking this pointed question right away.
Let's start with the news. You've signed on to a lawsuit with a half a dozen other states to challenge student loan debt relief for lower-income borrowers that President Joe Biden has put forward. Tell us about why you joined that challenge on behalf of Georgia.
Yeah, simply because we're a nation that's based on the rule of law. And the Supreme Court has already determined that the Biden administration couldn't do this. And Greg, going back to my time at, in D.C., I mean, this is the bottom line is Congress could debate this issue. And whether it's a good policy issue or a bad policy issue, that's for Congress to determine. What the president tried before is to go beyond the confines of the law. If he wants to do this, he should go to Congress. Now, I know that's tough. I know the Democrats control the Senate and the Republicans control the House, and he may or may not get what he wants or everything he wants, but that's what he's supposed to do. And we've already been down this path, and candidly, I mean, this is just crass politics for the president to do this. He knows he can't. He knows they're going to lose, but he wants to get the political benefit out of it. And candidly, also, there's a fairness issue. I mean, there's a lot of us that had student loans. We signed the document. We agreed that we pay back. Yes, there are times Congress has said if there's hardship, you can get a deferral or you can get your loans taken away, whatever it may be. But that's not what this law does. And the president knows it. He's trying to do it unilaterally. He can't do it. And again, we're a nation of laws, and it's got to be done the right way. And there is a fairness issue here as well. People do not think it is fair for my favorite waitress at the Waffle House to pay for the student loans of the doctor or the lawyer that lives down the street. It just isn't fair. It isn't right. And it's not constitutional.
Never mind the fact that President Biden's student loan forgiveness program is needs-based, and so the doctor or lawyer down the street, who obviously is making doctor or lawyer money, likely has less need than, say, the nurse, the radiology tech, et cetera, and so on, who doesn't make nearly as much as the doctor or lawyer does, maybe the paralegal even, who has student loan debt that is unsustainable for their personal finances due to the growing interests. Cue Bill Nigut for asking questions based on the Biden administration's making this policy a needs-based policy, and he asked Chris Carr about that. What do you say to Georgians who are struggling to pay their student loan debts and survive in the economy?
General Carr, one of the things you told the AJC when you became a part of this lawsuit was that you especially were disturbed by the fact that it was going to give forgiveness to people who can afford to repay their loans. But there are thousands of Georgians who have been repaying loans for a dozen years and more. Their interest payments are getting bigger and bigger, and many of them are not wealthy and able to pay back their loans themselves. And so this forgiveness plan would target them and try to give them some relief. So I have two questions for you based on that. Number one, what do you say to those people and the struggles that they are having to try to live a life at least, with less debt hanging over them from student years, many perhaps decades ago? And then number two, would you support a congressional effort to pass a student loan forgiveness plan?
Well, and I'd support Congress debating the issue, Bill, at the end of the day. But look, again, we're a nation based on laws. Congress could do this. Congress could to the president to do this, but they haven't. And the president hasn't even asked. So I would say to the president of the United States, why are you providing false hope to people based on your reelection campaign? That's all that this is. And I am not unsympathetic to people that have student loans. I had them. I paid them for years, but I chose to go to law school. I chose to take on those student loans. I knew what I was going to end up paying. But again, there are, under the federal code, there are times where hardships occur that you can apply for relief. What we're saying is that's what the president and that's what the Congress have to do. That's it. Because there, again, if the tables were turned, if the former president, if the Trump administration had done something that went outside the bounds of the law, you can rest assured the Democratic AGs would have sued them too. So again, it's got to be based on the rule of law.
What the Attorney General seems to be missing in his response is the politics of it. Is the Biden administration doing this to offer relief? Yes. Is the Biden administration playing politics? Oh, no, absolutely. But in doing so, they're trying to show the American people that they are willing to help those who are paying well beyond what their tuition cost, but also having to deal with the evolving, bloating interest. They're trying to show these same American people who's trying to help the common American and who's trying to obstruct help for the common American. Now, I'm not saying he's not politically savvy. I think he actually gets that. But I think he also thinks that most of his voting base perhaps doesn't get that. They just buy into the, well, it's not fair argument. I mean, it's also not fair to ask a 17 or 18-year-old to sign documents that have dozens of pages of fine print that don't spell out in plain language and in obvious terms what's going to happen when you sign these student loan documents. I mean, nobody's rushing to sign legislation to ensure that students who sign these student loan documents, these contracts, that these contracts be in plain language and the specificity spelled out, right? Because then you would have folks not showing up to go to college to become nurses or radiologists or radiologist techs. And the medical community needs more personnel working, right? To quote Admiral Akbar. Exactly. It is interesting, however, that Attorney General Chris Carr wanted to be very legalese about fairness and unfairness and what's legal and constitutional, et cetera, and so on. And then when he got asked, what about the 2020 election interference case, and why are you not jumping on that? Bill Nigut, along with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's Patricia Murphy, querying him on those Coffee County and the Trump election cases.
Let me change subjects on you, if you don't mind. It's been, 3 years since the Coffee County data breach? There's been an investigation of the breach by the state. Where does it stand, and what's taking so long?
Thanks, Bill. It's actually an ongoing investigation.
Yes.
And one of the things I'll say, I'm not going to get into the specifics of it, but let me just say this. Anytime a prosecutor is given a case from investigators, that doesn't necessarily mean the case is over and it doesn't need further investigation or further analysis. So whether it's a DA, whether it's our office, those issues sometimes arise. But this is an important issue. Obviously, it's been a big issue, and we'll continue to. And I'll deal with it as I've done all issues, and that's based on the facts and the evidence and what the right.
Why is it taking so long?
I'm not going to get into the specifics of that, Bill, because that would be going into the case itself. But we'll continue to handle it as we have everything else.
All right. Staying with 2020, obviously Fani Willis has decided to indict a number of people, including former President Donald Trump, on the events following the 2020 elections. The state has not filed any charges over that activity. Is that something that y'all are still considering doing?
No, we looked at it, Patricia. We analyzed it from our perspective and chose not to go down that route.
Does that mean that y'all felt like there was no criminal activity and nothing to be charged? Should we read that into that decision?
Good question.
We felt that based on the facts and the evidence, what the right thing or the wrong thing to do would be is to not file charges in that particular situation.
So when it comes to efforts to overturn a presidential election, the Attorney General, Chris Carr of the state of Georgia, chose what would be the right thing or the wrong thing to do. Not based on law. Patricia Murphy pointedly asked, you looked at this and based on the law, made your decision. And that's not what he said. He didn't say that based on the law. He just decided unilaterally what would be the right thing or the wrong thing to do. I would like to know, if I were there to ask, I would like to know, well, what was it that you used to make that decision? What parameters, what came to mind that made you decide what would be the right thing or the wrong thing to do? Legally, specifically, Mr. Attorney General, Mr. Carr, what did you decide were factors that made that decision so evidentiary for you when you are also talking about the right thing or the wrong thing to do when it comes to unburdening not just Georgia residents, but Americans across the country who are saddled with crippling student debt? You decided the right thing or the wrong thing to do when it came to overturning a presidential election, and then made the same right thing, wrong thing call with student loan forgiveness? Not buying that, sir. It's a dicey thing for any Republican in office at the state or federal level to cross Donald Trump. And listen, Chris Carr has every reason to maybe want to axe grind the former president. Although Chris Carr is endorsing Donald Trump's comeback bid. He said so on the Politically Georgia podcast yesterday. He's supporting the full GOP slate, he said, even though Donald Trump recruited a Republican to challenge him in 2022. And we're watching as this attempt to see the GOP try to do two things. Maintain the party, keep that coalition together, the MAGA and the ideological, I guess, pure, and continue winning seats while trying to navigate through this MAGA storm. We saw where Governor Brian Kemp, and we'll speak to this just in a little bit, spoke at Kelly Loeffler's Greater Georgia event. Governor Kemp put Kelly Loeffler in the Senate seat, and then Kelly Loeffler sort of drifted from Governor Kemp in supporting Donald Trump when Governor Kemp had long ago soured on Trump's antics. But they were reunited, Kemp and Loeffler anyway. As yesterday's Politically Georgia blog states, the message Tuesday to the hundreds of donors, lawmakers, and party figures who packed the audience was that both camps have moved on, and Loeffler, now eyeing a comeback Senate bid or a campaign to succeed Kemp as governor, could be telegraphing how she could position herself in 2026 as a candidate who can unite the party's mainstream with its MAGA base. Yeah, they're trying to both sort of wash their hands of Trumpism if he somehow winds up in jail and or loses in 2024, and keep the party together. It's hard enough to imagine the MAGA movement even accepting Trump's loss, because they didn't in 2020, still haven't, and or keeping a party together that may one day decide after, say, they lose in 2024, it's time to move on from them. I mean, it's long overdue for them to move on from Donald Trump, but will the MAGA movement allow the GOP to do this? And it's so funny, like we're watching this struggle sort of happen now, even in Congress, where Marjorie Taylor Greene really wants to remove Mike Johnson as Speaker of the House because he dares to, do his damn job as Speaker of the House, put bills up for votes, necessary bills up for votes, Israel aid, Taiwanese aid, yes, Ukrainian aid. And again, Brian Kemp from the less nutty wing of the GOP basically spoke against Marjorie Taylor Greene doing that. And Marjorie's kind of doing a whip count. She's seeing that she doesn't have the votes. She may try to remove Mike Johnson, but that's not going to work, largely because she has Republican pushback. We'll discuss more of that in just a minute. The Ron Show on America One Radio. Visit the show's website, ronshowatl.com, if you'd like to catch full episodes of the show, past episodes of the show, some sidebar blogs from time to time, and yes, an opportunity for you to support the show with a nice little donation. I mean, it could be just something like a cup of coffee if you'd like. I mean, whatever you can do. This has been a largely out-of-pocket expense for me, and I enjoy doing that. That's fine. I just can't always afford to do that. And you notice that we try and keep the commercials to a minimum, especially within the show. Now, whether you're listening on America One Radio, AmericaOneRadio.com, you may hear commercials within their segments, but not on the show. Anyway, RonShowATL.com if you'd like to show some support. So I was talking earlier about this this attempt by some of the mainstream GOP minds to try and keep the party together and on track to try and win in 2024 as well, and position themselves to survive if Donald Trump should lose and or wind up in prison. Marjorie Taylor Greene is kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, where she's trying to keep the spotlight on herself because I think she has brighter ambitions, perhaps being Donald Trump's VP pick, but also she's kind of running afoul of Donald Trump right now. S.E. Cupp, who, by the way, is a conservative and a commentator on CNN, has an unfiltered segment that she runs at CNN.com. I want you to listen to her thoughts on the current Mike Johnson v. Marjorie Taylor Greene kerfuffle.
This is nothing more than just look at me. This is Unfiltered. I'm S.E. Cupp. Those words were uttered by a Republican member of Congress, Max Miller of Ohio. He was talking about fellow Republican member of Congress, Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia. Greene's very public efforts to oust the second Republican Speaker of the House in less than 6 months has thus far not been the threat she was hoping it would be. Speaker Mike Johnson first became a target of Greene after he led the House to pass a bipartisan spending package last month. Now he's drawn her ire for suggesting he'll bring an aid package for Ukraine to the floor. Perhaps wanting to get some of the attention Florida Rep. Matt Gaetz got when he successfully led the effort to oust the last Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, Greene has been out flaunting her motion to vacate threat for weeks. But so far, she hasn't found the will or the way, with other Republican support, to make it happen. Now, a new blow to her effort. Johnson is appearing side by side with former President Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago on Friday to help him push his baseless fear-mongering about election integrity. It seems to be a three-part effort by Johnson to first, bolster Trump's election lies, second, kiss the ring, and third, help save his job. That Trump is bringing Johnson in is a signal he's got his back, at least for the moment. And according to Politico reporting, Trump and his advisors are annoyed with Greene for her efforts, rightly believing that throwing the House GOP back into chaos would be bad for the party's election chances. Her fellow House Republicans, many of whom are pro-Trump, as she claims to be, have not been shy in telling Greene what they think of her. This is incredibly reckless, said Miller. No one else is paying attention. New York Rep. Mark Molinaro said, I think it's an absurdity that's unnecessary, and frankly, it was a mistake when Congress allowed it to happen to Kevin McCarthy. Rep. Troy Nehls of Texas said of Johnson, it's an impossible job. The Lord Jesus himself could not manage this conference. You just can't do it. Yet, Greene insists the motion to vacate is real. And when asked about Johnson's press conference with Trump, she said, totally two separate issues. Hopefully they have a great meeting tomorrow. Trump doesn't seem to want her to do this. Many of her conference members clearly don't want her to do this. So the question is, who is this for? What is the point? Well, it's not that complicated. It's for Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Bingo.
And the point is to say, look at me. In other words, Greene has become irrelevant.
The party that loves watching wrestling because it's a soap opera and less an athletic event, and whose fearless leader came from a reality show called Celebrity Apprentice, really loves primetime drama. They love to watch a primetime drama. And their party has become something of a reality TV show, Celebrity Apprentice style. You're fired, you're hired, I'm going with this guy. Because we're still watching to see who Donald Trump anoints. And Marjorie Taylor Greene is not in a position right now where she looks really good to be that pick. And she badly wants to be that pick. And make no mistake, this all comes down to whether or not Ukraine gets aid. It has nothing to do with Israel. It has nothing to do with Taiwan. It's all about Ukraine. And why is that so important to Marjorie Taylor Greene? Anyway, I'm going to read from the Politically Georgia blog. Monday, Greene panned Mike Johnson's proposal, which decouples aid to Israel, just targeted with an Iranian barrage with the less popular plan to boost Ukraine. The Eastern European nation has been fending off a Russian invasion for more than 2 years with help from the U.S. and other allies. Greene stopped short, however, of saying whether she would call for a vote on a motion to vacate that could depose Johnson. That's right. Now that Trump has spoken, she's waffling. She said, I support the majority and I want it next time, so I'm being careful. He's definitely not going to be Speaker next Congress if we're lucky enough to have the majority. That, my friends, is a capitulation to reality. Marjorie Taylor Greene realizes she's not in a position. She doesn't have the cards. And more importantly, she doesn't have Donald Trump's backing to do what she really wants to do and follow through on her threat. All right, we've got lots more to cover, including a pep talk from one of my favorites on social media, Politics Girl. When the Ron Show returns on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, or wherever you podcast.
This is The Ron Show on America One Radio.
So if you've listened to me for a while, or even just in the last few weeks or last couple months or whatever, you know that I'd like to think you would come away thinking that I'm a bit of a realist and a touch of a cynic, too. Like, I've definitely got some cynicism in me. I know the score. I know that here in 2024, we're in an election cycle with an incumbent president. Sorry if my English teachers are listening. We're dealing with an incumbent president who is not wildly popular. He's not, and really, and maybe in a hyper-partisan era, there's no such thing anymore. This is such a unique situation, though. The incumbent president did not win his party's primary in his his most recent run for the office of the presidency. He essentially won it in a bit of a panic-driven, we've got to come together, can't do a normal primary season because of a pandemic sort of scenario, where really the race was just getting started, right? And then the pandemic came up and became pretty obvious life's not going to be normal for a little while. And so folks coalesced behind the establishment candidate, who before then, I think there had only been a couple of states that had weighed in, but hadn't won any of those states. And I'm not suggesting that prior to this coalescing behind him, he wouldn't have won anyway. I actually don't know that he would have. I mean, it was such an interesting dichotomy of candidates, right? I mean, you had Pete Buttigieg and you had Senator Bernie Sanders, and who knows how this would have played out. Nonetheless, the party coalesced behind Joe Biden without the voters' endorsement. Now, when the option became binary between the then incumbent Donald Trump and Joe Biden, given the fact that in 2020 the economy was in tatters, the pandemic was raging, there didn't seem to be a cogent and cohesive response from the federal government, who, under Trump's tutelage, really wanted to just kind of play hands off and leave it to the states. Boy, he loves that states' rights stuff. When something's too big to tackle, it's too complex, leave it to the states. So, yes, the American people then weighed in and says, all right, this chaos is kind of crazy, and we need to move on. So I guess what I'm getting to is we're just in this unique election cycle where the incumbent president did not win his party's primary the last time out and doesn't really have any competition this primary season, so he gets to be the guy, and also he's the incumbent, and political parties, the major two, tend to like rallying behind their incumbent if and when they decide to run for re-election. And so we have these binary options again, where it's the same to the incumbent president who came into office in an unconventional manner, and the guy before who is under indictment in multiple states, multiple jurisdictions, and was just convicted in a civil case with hundreds of millions of dollars owed by him to the victim. And yet, because the political party that oft-indicted, deeply flawed man belongs to lacks those with courage, those with character, those with moral turpitude to stand up, at least in large enough numbers, to tell that man, you've got to go. Sorry, but you're evicted or you're fired. Because that party lacks enough of that strain of courage, here we are again. And I am no different than a lot of you. It's really hard some days to wake up and feel energized and enthused and, fired up and ready to go, as the President Obama narrative went in 2008 and in 2012. Fired up, ready to go. It's hard to be fired up and ready to go. It just is. We're trying our best here to tap dance, on the left, I say, and say, well, the economy's in good shape. It is in way better shape than when President Biden was sworn into office, for sure. But we also have to face the political realities, actually the kitchen table realities, that while Americans aren't at a loss for jobs or job opportunities, a lot of Americans are either spending less or doing with less or spending as much but putting more on the credit card. And we've talked at great length about that with the Federal Reserve and what are they going to do with their core interest. I argued, in fact, you know what? I sat down and I had lunch, late lunch, early dinner last weekend with congressional candidate Mal Hyman in South Carolina. Representative Ro Khanna from California was in town in Columbia, South Carolina last Saturday. I sat down and had lunch with the two of them and some of our staffers, and I made the pitch. I literally did. I made the pitch, and did I see Representative Khanna kind of nod his head like maybe he agrees a little bit? There seems to be, maybe I'm not the only one that thinks this. The Federal Reserve is looking at monthly inflationary numbers and waiting on the magical numbers in the twos that I just don't think are going to get there anytime soon. And maybe it's time to start bringing the rate down anyway because Americans are living on their credit cards. Anyway, these realities exist. We know that the Israel-Gaza situation is a problem. We know that it's a wedge even within the Democratic Party. These are scary times we live in. And so from time to time, I find myself needing a pep talk. Like some of you maybe have come to me thinking, maybe this guy will give me the pep talk. And I am left of center. I am a Bernie-esque kind of Democrat. But I'm also the type that's going to tell our own party when we're not doing things or saying things or speaking to the American people in ways that I think the American people need to hear us speak. I'm just going to be very real about that. So I have to reach from time to time for that inspiration when I lack it. And I'm going to give it to you. If you don't follow Politics Girl on TikTok or Twitter X, the X platform, well, start, because she gives it to you, man. And I understand, I understand that she is very much on the left and is going to give the positive spin. But when she really gives it to us in heaping doses of real, I'm going to share it, and I'm going to, partake myself. I'm going to absorb it myself. Lee McGowan is Politics Girl, the woman you see standing in her kitchen, giving it to us on the real. And here's a great example of that.
I'm starting to think that people who sincerely worry about President Biden's age would feel better if they knew more about Vice President Kamala Harris. That if, God forbid, something should happen that made Biden unable to serve, it's important that voters feel confident his replacement was ready to lead. It seems obvious to me that the vice president is absolutely ready to lead and we'd be lucky to have her. And yet so many people, and I'm including engaged, informed people, seem to have bought into this false narrative that Kamala Harris is some kind of a disaster. So I thought I would take a moment to play that out, because I don't believe the idea is based in fact or any real concerns for her actual ability, but rather an incredibly successful PR campaign by powerful people concerned that a potential Harris presidency would not only open the door to women leading this country, but prove once and for all that Obama wasn't an anomaly, and that Black people are indeed capable of leading America. And for many people, that simply will not do. So let's break it down and deal with the facts. What if Kamala Harris did become president? What would be wrong with that? And you can't just say, I don't know, I just don't like her, because it's unlikely you know her. So instead, ask yourself, what is it about her you don't like? And if you can't quite put your finger on it, then I would say, be curious if the problem is really her gender or her race or the fact that certain people with deep pockets and media influence somehow got in your head. And I'd hazard to say that none of those things are a good enough reason to think she'd be bad at the job. Here's what I know. Since the day Vice President Harris was sworn in, there has been a coordinated effort to make it seem as if she is both invisible and inept. Where is she? What is she even doing? Our media will report on Donald Trump's plane sitting on the tarmac, but not our vice president building relationships with African leaders, or vetting a now Supreme Court justice, or heading up the new White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention. Why is that? The fact of the matter is, when you write it all down, Kamala Harris is actually one of the most accomplished vice presidents this country has ever had. But most people don't know that, and that's a problem. Did you know our vice president was the first woman elected district attorney of San Francisco, one of the biggest cities in the nation, a job she was subsequently re-elected to do? Did you know she was the first woman to be Attorney General of California, running the second largest Department of Justice in the entire country, a job that she was also re-elected to do? After that, Kamala Harris was elected to be Senator of California, representing 1 in 8 Americans, and now she's the first woman vice president in the country's history. Now, there's a point where we have to ask ourselves how competent and qualified a woman, especially a woman of color, has to be in this country to be taken seriously. Because to say someone with all of those qualifications is incompetent or unready to lead just makes no sense. In my political lifetime, the vice presidents of this country have run the gambit. I would be surprised if anyone could tell me a success from any of their time in office. Mike Pence is remembered for being hyper-Christian, calling his wife mother, having a fly sit on his head during a debate, almost being hung by a mob of his own party, and failing to help the country as head of the COVID task force. Joe Biden was the good-natured white wingman to our first black president. Dick Cheney was, for all intents and purposes, the shadow president of George W., who shot his friend in the face and made a ton of money for himself and his friend through American wars. Dan Quayle is literally remembered for spelling potato wrong. And now, thankfully, for reminding Mike Pence he didn't actually have the power to overturn the American election. I think we could safely argue that history shows us Al Gore not only won the 2000 election and should have been our 43rd president, but was a solid VP in the Clinton years. Though I believe you'd be hard-pressed to name one specific thing he did during that time. Bush Sr. can be credited with getting the ball rolling with the evangelicals, who eventually got Roe overturned as Reagan's VP, and it was that success that won him the presidency, but he was decimated in re-election because no one really bought his 1,000 points of light leadership. Spiro Agnew took the fall for Nixon, while Ford was simply chosen as VP with the sole purpose of pardoning Nixon, so that's not really a fantastic legacy. I think with all of that in mind, we have to acknowledge that the Vice President of the United States is a fundamentally weird job. You take an ambitious leader and you neuter them to play an undervalued and overlooked second banana role, where they have to prove themselves as a team player until they can potentially earn their party's support to run for president themselves.
So true.
It's a thankless role, a behind-the-scenes role, a don't steal focus from the president kind of position. You have to defer, you have to dim your light, you have to wait your turn. It's always been like that. But of course, the very first woman to hold the position is being asked why she's not doing more, why she's not shining, why she's muzzled, and she's being held to a far higher standard than anyone who came before. So let's understand the role of the vice president, shall we? 2 of the key responsibilities of the VP are to preside over the Senate and break ties as needed. So with our current Senate, which is no longer a responsible deliberative body, but a battleground of party politics where the Democratic majority has to defer to the Republican minority thanks to an arcane rule called the filibuster, VP Harris has been responsible for breaking the most ties in modern Senate history. Vice President Harris is also responsible for overseeing many of the most important aspects of the U.S. government, like healthcare, immigration, and education. And in doing so, she championed progressive policies like expanding healthcare coverage to millions of Americans, increasing the minimum wage by pushing for a raise for all U.S. workers on federal projects, and encouraging more union membership in the federal workforce. In fact, her work on expanding the unions has union membership up by 20% since she began. It's VP Harris who's overseeing the Biden administration's national broadband goal of getting 100% of America access to reliable high-speed internet. Under her leadership, the Affordable Connectivity Program is saving Americans billions of dollars by providing free high-speed internet and discounts to purchase computers. If that's news to you, as it was to me, you can check if you qualify for free internet or hardware discounts by going to getinternet.gov. Vice President Harris has also advocated for policies that help low-income Americans access affordable healthcare, housing, and education. She believes debt-free college is the key to improving our economy, and there are plans to bring back those key points of Build Back Better should the Biden-Harris administration retain power and regain Congress. Among other things, she's been leading the charge on the Ukraine crisis, making a week-long trip to Africa to strengthen our relationship with the continent, and her trip to Singapore and Vietnam in 2021 laid the foundations for a historic deal the Biden administration signed with Vietnam. to not only have them buy billions of dollars in American-made airplanes, but to strengthen our supply chain for computer chips, which reduces America's dependence on China. She has also worked diligently to reduce gun violence, including her extensive work on the bipartisan assault weapons ban, extending background checks for gun purchases, and now heading up the new Gun Violence Prevention Office at the White House. She's been an absolute champion for maternal health, as 50,000 American mothers face life-altering health challenges every year from pregnancy complications, which is just another reason why VP Harris has been such an outspoken advocate for reproductive freedom. Because it's clear that our country shouldn't be forcing women, who are twice as likely to die giving birth in America than they were 20 years ago, to be pregnant against their will. Vice President Harris is a champion of environmental causes, like increasing renewable energy production to combat climate change. She's been a huge advocate for the Affordable Care Act, and she has used her platform to call for the passage of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the Freedom to Vote Act, both which Republicans defeated in Congress as Democrats were trying to protect our rights. For the entire first term, Vice President Kamala Harris has been traveling our country, highlighting the administration's policies, its manufacturing jobs, and its new grants. She led the small business outreach to get money into the hands of the businesses who really need it, and is working on a $1.25 billion program for small businesses with Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, focusing primarily on underrepresented entrepreneurs. Finally, Vice President Harris has been the public face of the Biden administration's response to some of the country's most pivotal events, like the fall of abortion rights, the removal of the Tennessee legislatures for defending gun control activists, and the attempt of Florida Republicans to argue that enslaved people benefited personally from slavery because they learned skills. Did you see the response when she went to support the Tennessee Three, or the powerful speech she made standing up for democracy? Did you catch the incredible articulation of her outrage as she spoke in Florida about DeSantis having the audacity to try and gaslight the American public about our own history? The youth of America did, and they loved it. So if you find yourself being one of those people out here saying she doesn't connect with the people, what you're really saying is that you haven't been paying attention to her over the past 4 years. So maybe we should stop asking what she's been doing. She's been busy. She's been here every day getting the work done for the American people. She understands that democracy is only as strong as the people willing to fight for it, and she's willing to take on that fight. Aside from her popularity with non-white voters and women, young people will be the first to tell you they love Kamala. In fact, many young people say it's Kamala that will bring them to vote for the Biden-Harris ticket. They aren't afraid of the idea of her in charge. Vice President Harris is a reflection of what they, and now critical demographic, want to see in their leaders. So maybe we can stop being so critical of a role that until a woman took it, we didn't pay much attention to. Kamala Harris is more than qualified. She's ready. She's proved she knows how to be a team player, but she can step into the spotlight when she needs to. I personally have utter faith in the leadership of Vice President Harris, but I follow politics for a living, and I've known what she's up to even when the media is not reporting it. But now that you know, I hope you might consider feeling the same. Because if we can just put aside our country's sad history with racism and misogyny and realize that we are in an incredibly powerful position with a kind, competent, forward-thinking incrementalist running for re-election and a powerful, passionate, brilliant progressive waiting in the wings, we will see that we have a winning ticket. And the sooner we realize that, the less powerful those who seek to undermine it will be. Biden-Harris, 2024.
I mean, that's great messaging for us in our own camp, on our side of the ideological spectrum. And I needed to hear that. We still have to deal with, how we talk about the economy in a practical manner towards the American family. And Israel-Gaza creates a divide within our own camp. But big picture, Democrats, liberals, progressive, we have to look at what we have and think for the greater good. Are we 65, 75, 80% happy with our ticket? Well, we got to ride with that into the election cycle because the alternative is not only insane, it's undemocratic with a little d. Back after this. All right, you know by now that the sound of that music means we're in the home stretch. Thank you so much for listening to The Ron Show. Follow us at Ron Show ATL on Facebook, the Twitter X platform, Instagram as well. Politics Girl, by the way, doesn't just have a dose of, hey, Democrats, get your shit together and get behind our candidates, rah-rah. Just for us. Oh, no, she's got something for Republicans as well. And a legit get your shit together sort of rant earlier this month. Take a listen to Lee McGowan.
Lifelong Republicans, I want to ask you how committed you are to that R beside the candidate's name. Are you more committed to that R than you are to your human rights or to the human rights of others? More dedicated to that R than having access to healthcare? So loyal to the Republican name that you're willing to give up your Social Security and Medicare? More devoted to voting Republican than you are to a functioning government or to an international world order? Is your passion for that R so strong that you choose dictatorship over democracy as the leading movement around the world? Does voting Republican mean more to you than a functioning rule of law? Because that's what's on the line here. If you vote Republican without understanding what the Republican Party has become, then you will send us down a rabbit hole from which few of us will ever return. There is simply too much on the line to just do what you've always done. This is not your father's Republican Party. This party has nothing to do with small government or low taxes unless you happen to be a billionaire or a corporation. This is an anti-union, anti-worker, anti-woman, anti-democratic, environmentally destructive white Christian nationalist party led by a criminal leader who has told us out loud he wants to be a dictator. His own vice president, the man of faith who legitimized this womanizing thrice-divorced con man for Christian voters and worked most closely with him in office, refuses to endorse him. The assistant to his chief of staff calls him a danger to our country. His former White House communications director says a second Trump presidency could be the end of democracy as we know it. The highest-ranking military officer who worked under Trump says he is a tyrant and that our troops didn't risk their lives to watch the great experiment in democracy perish under his leadership. Trump has told us directly the Republican Party has no room for McCain Republicans, no room for Romney Republicans, and that if you voted for another candidate in the primary, he doesn't want you. Everyone from Liz Cheney to Paul Ryan have left. There is no room left in this party for anyone but sycophants who will allow Donald Trump to function above the law and rule us all without guardrails or morality. So I'm going to ask you again, how committed are you to that R? Because the Republican House is clearly useless and unable to govern. The Republican Senate are nothing but obstructionists, and the state Republicans are systematically stripping our rights from us every single day. A vote for a Republican today is a vote against America, against everything America is supposed to stand for. So you don't need to feel bad if you refuse to support them. You wouldn't be leaving the Republican Party. They left you. Conservatism isn't dead. The Republican Party is. And we need to defeat them soundly at the ballot box so we can get back to something resembling normal. We can fight about policy later. Right now, it's about saving our country. So don't vote big R for Republican. Vote little d for democracy.
Earlier in the week, I'm listening to NPR's All Things Considered, and NPR Arizona reporter Jimena Bustillo is reporting on a key demographic in the swing state of Arizona that could alter the outcome for President Joe Biden in his favor because of the antics of former President Donald Trump. Take a listen to this real quick.
Donald Trump is the presumptive Republican presidential nominee, but in a state like Arizona, he still has work to do.
I have been the same person from 2015 to 2024, and the party has moved away from me.
That's Jane Anderson. She's a resident of Gilbert and a member of Mormon Women for Ethical Government, a nonprofit that promotes civic engagement. Sitting with other women in her living room, she says she has always and still considers herself a Republican, but has never supported Trump.
Probably the ultimate nail in the coffin was when he made fun of the disabled reporter. I have a child that's disabled. When you are mocking someone's how they are as a person and trying to lift yourself up by bullying someone else, not only did that not resonate with me, it angered me.
That same instance is what also convinced Dan Barker, a retired Arizona judge and LDS member, that Trump was not the guy for him. But he didn't want to give up his Republican identity.
So when Nan says to my wife, hey, let's put up a Biden sign. Well, gee, I've been a Republican my whole life. And I was appointed by 2 Republican governors to serve on our Superior Court and the Arizona Court of Appeals. And, I just wasn't quite comfortable identifying with the Democratic Party.
So he created the Political Action Committee, Arizona Republicans who believe in treating others with respect, or as the sign says, Republicans for Biden.
That's one of the main reasons we did it, so that people would know that you could be a conservative and vote for Biden.
Handing out...
I will share that along with Politics Girls Antics in today's show notes at ronshowatl.com. Also, the Politically Georgia podcast interview with Attorney General Chris Carr. Replays 5 to 6 p.m. today on America One Radio and back tomorrow 9 to 10 a.m. On demand at progressivevoices.com. Have a great one.